When a mother walks in to find her twin children naked and in a state no siblings should ever be, she convinces herself there must be another explanation. But after placing hidden cameras around the house, she uncovers a horrifying truth that will leave everyone screaming in terror. If this sent chills down your spine, smash that like button, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe now and don't miss the next part, because the nightmare has only just begun. Lena had always known the weight of her responsibilities. As a mother, as a wife, and as a professional, her days were long that never seemed to give her a moment's rest. But tonight, something felt different. Something unsettling lingered in the air. She had returned home late, the exhaustion of the day already pulling at her limbs as she pushed open the door. The house greeted her with an eerie silence, a sharp contrast to the usual chaos of her evenings. Her sister Raina, the ever-reliable nanny, stood waiting, her face pale, her hands twisting nervously. "Lena, there's something you need to know," Raina began, her voice low and trembling, as though the weight of the words she was about to speak could shatter the fragile calm of the room. Lena dropped her bag by the door, a frown creasing her brow as she slipped off her shoes. The simple act of freeing her feet from the heels had once been a relief, a way to shake off the day's stress. But tonight, no such comfort arrived. "What is it? What happened?" she asked, though deep down she feared the answer. Raina hesitated, casting a glance over her shoulder to make sure no one else was around. Her whisper was barely audible as she explained, "I was downstairs preparing lunch. I heard noises from Mila's room. I went upstairs, and when I opened the door—" She paused, her voice shaking as she continued, "Mila wasn't wearing any clothes, Lena. And Liam's. He was. There too. He ran out the moment I opened the door." Lena stared at her, her mind struggling to process the words. It felt as though the floor beneath her had shifted, leaving her unsteady. "Are you sure, Raina? Are you absolutely certain?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of disbelief. Raina bristled, her eyes flashing with frustration. "Of course I'm sure. You know I wouldn't lie about something like this." Lena's heart pounded in her chest, the warmth of the house replaced by a suffocating sense of dread. Raina had always been trustworthy, but the image she painted, her innocent children involved in something so inappropriate, it was too much to take in. For a moment she just stood there staring at her sister, trying to make sense of it all. Liam's and Mila were only 12. They are twins. They were curious, yes, but could they really? No, it didn't seem possible. They were children. The questions swirled in her mind. She found them in the living room, huddled together on the couch, their faces lighting up as they saw her. "Mommy!" Mila shouted, jumping up to hug her, and Liam's quickly followed. They wrapped their arms around her, and for a brief moment she felt the comfort of their affection, a small flicker of warmth that almost made her forget what Raina had just said. Lena gently pushed them away, her voice steady but firm. "We need to talk. Your Aunt Raina told me something, and I need to know the truth." Both children looked up at her, their wide eyes full of innocence. "What did she say?" Liam's asked, his voice small but curious. "She told me that something happened in Mila's room today. She said you were both there and—" Lena paused, taking a deep breath. "She said you weren't wearing any clothes." The room fell silent. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Liam shook his head, his expression firm. "That's not true, Mommy. We didn't do anything." Mila, standing beside her brother, nodded in agreement. "Aunt Raina is lying," she said, with the same conviction. Lena's gaze moved from one child to the other. There was no hesitation in their voices, no flicker of guilt in their eyes. They spoke with such certainty that for a moment Lena felt her resolve waver. Could Raina have misunderstood? "Are you sure?" Lena's voice was sharper now, tinged with desperation. "You know I won't tolerate lies." "Yes, Mommy, we're telling the truth," Liam said, his voice unwavering. Myla echoed him, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Lena stood there, looking at them both. They seemed so sure, so confident in their innocence. But Raina wasn't the kind of person to make up stories like this. She had no reason to lie. That night, Lena lay awake in bed, her mind racing. She hadn't told Damien, her husband, yet. What would he say? How would he react? The uncertainty gnawed at her. Something wasn't right in her home. She could feel it in her bones, in the air, in the way her children looked at her with those wide, innocent eyes. And whatever it was, she was determined to uncover it. As the days went by, life carried on as if nothing had happened. Curiously, Lena's sister Raina hadn't mentioned the incident with the twins again. Perhaps Raina had misinterpreted the situation, Lena thought. Mila and Liam's were always so close, inseparable since birth. It wasn't unusual for them to be together at all times. She tried to push aside the unease that had lingered in the back of her mind since that evening. She wanted to believe in the innocence of her children, in the love and care Raina had always shown them. But life can always take unexpected turns. That afternoon, while she was busy cleaning Liam's room, the unease bubbled to the surface again. As she wiped the dust off his desk and picked up a few scattered toys, her eyes wandered to his dresser. Something inside her pulled her toward it. She hesitated, feeling a knot form in her stomach. Slowly, she opened the drawer and began organizing the clothes inside. That's when she saw it. A small piece of fabric. Not just any fabric. It was a pair of Mila's underwear, folded neatly amongst Liam's shirts. The air seemed to thicken around her as she stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of conversations, half-formed thoughts that had been lingering for days. How could this have ended up here? "Liam's!" Her voice, sharp and urgent, echoed through the house. "Liam's!" She called again, louder this time, her voice tinged with hysteria as it bounced off the walls. The quiet home seemed to swallow her voice, amplifying her dread. A few moments later, Liam's appeared at the door. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, nervously eyeing her. Lena held up the underwear, her hand trembling slightly. "What does this mean?" she demanded, her voice laced with disbelief. Liam's eyes widened further, confusion washing over his face. I don't know, Mom. I swear. I don't know how that got there." Lena's eyes bore into him, her grip tightening on the fabric. "You expect me to believe that?" she said, her voice trembling with anger and confusion. "This is your sister's, Liam's. How did it end up in your drawer?" "I don't know," he cried, his voice cracking. "Maybe Raina put it there by accident when she was folding our clothes. I didn't do anything, I swear." Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she studied her son's face, searching for any signs of deceit. His eyes were full of fear, his body trembling slightly, as he stood there, helpless under her scrutiny. Without another word, Lena let out a long, shaky breath and placed the underwear back in the drawer. "Go," she said quietly, barely looking at Liam's as he hurried out of the room. She collapsed onto his bed, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers. "God," she whispered, staring up at the ceiling. "What is happening to my children?" The afternoon slipped away into evening, and as the shadows lengthened outside, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was looming over her family. The silence in the house was oppressive, thick and stifling, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. waiting for something to break. Later that night, when Damien returned from work, Lena was still haunted by the day's events. As soon as he stepped inside, she told him everything. About the underwear, about Liam's reaction, about her suspicions. Damien listened quietly, his brow furrowing as she spoke. "That's ridiculous," he said finally, anger flaring in his voice. "They're just kids, Lena. You're overthinking this." Lena shook her head, her voice a whisper of desperation. "I want to believe that, but it doesn't make sense. Something isn't right." Damien sighed heavily, his patience waning. "They said they didn't do anything, right? Maybe Raina did make a mistake. Maybe you're letting your imagination get the best of you." But even as he spoke, Lena saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't have the answers either. None of them did. And the silence between them only deepened the chasm of doubt that was already pulling them apart. The night wore on, and the house once again fell into its suffocating stillness. But Lena's mind was anything but quiet. She lay awake, staring into the darkness. As days trickled by, Lena tried to push the unease aside, but it clung to her like a shadow she couldn't shake off. Life in the house went on as if nothing had happened, yet a part of her remained restless. Raina hadn't brought up the incident again, and that only made Lena more unsure. She kept telling herself that Raina might have overreacted. One afternoon, Raina had asked for the day off. Lena decided to leave work early. The house was deathly silent when she stepped inside. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your chest, making it hard to breathe. She dropped her bag at the door and called out, "Mila? Liam's?" Nothing. Her heart rate picked up, the eerie quiet unsettling her. She walked through the living room, eyes darting around, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. The kitchen, empty. The backyard, still. The oppressive quiet gnawed at her, and she swallowed hard. They must be upstairs. She crept up the staircase, slipping off her shoes to soften her steps. Her heart thudded in her chest as she reached the landing, and that's when she noticed it. Mila's bedroom door was slightly ajar. Lena stood frozen for a moment, an irrational fear coursing through her veins. Slowly, she pushed the door open. What she saw made her stomach lurch. Liam's and Mila, her beautiful, innocent children, were lying on the bed, completely naked, their bodies intertwined in a way that sent a shockwave through Lena's entire being. For a second, she couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. Her mind reeled, trying to make sense of the image in front of her. The moment they saw her, both children scrambled apart, terrified. Their small faces turned pale, eyes wide in panic. "What the hell are you doing?" Lena's voice was a choked whisper at first, but it quickly escalated, her fury boiling over. "What were you thinking?" Tears filled Mila's eyes instantly, and Liam's lip quivered. "We didn't do anything, Mommy," Liam's pleaded, his voice shaking as he fumbled to cover himself. "We didn't do anything wrong." Lena's hands trembled as she stepped closer, her eyes locked on them, unable to comprehend. "Don't lie to me," she hissed, barely recognizing her own voice. "Tell me the truth." "We're not lying," Mila sobbed, pulling her knees to her chest. "We didn't do anything bad." Their cries pierced the room, their voices desperate, and Lena's rage faltered. She looked at them, her babies terrified, shaking, and for a moment, doubt crept into her mind. Could they really not understand? Could they be telling the truth? Lena couldn't take it anymore. She turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Her breath came in heavy gasps as she paced the hallway. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, she finally told Damien. She didn't want to. She had considered keeping it to herself, but this was too big to ignore. She needed him to know, to understand what she had seen. He listened with a deep frown etched on his face, his knuckles turning white as he clenched his fists. When she finished, he stood up, pacing the room in agitated silence. "I can't believe it," he muttered, shaking his head. "Our kids, doing that. No, this needs to stop. I'm going to talk to them. This kind of behavior, it's not right, Lena." She sighed, pressing her hands to her temples. "I don't know what to do, Damien. They swear they didn't do anything wrong. But how can we be sure?" Damien's frustration was palpable, his pacing frantic. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Lena. Trust me. They can't keep doing this. They need to know this is wrong." But when he confronted the children later that night, the twins' story didn't change. They insisted, through sobs, that they hadn't done anything inappropriate. Lena and Damien just more confused, more disturbed by what had happened. The days dragged on, the tension between Lena and Damien growing as they struggled to figure out what was happening in their home. Lena felt the weight of it pressing down on her, suffocating her every thought. She couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was wrong, something she wasn't seeing. The children's claims of innocence left her feeling more paranoid than ever. And then one night, as she lay next to Damien in bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, an idea began to form. Hidden cameras. If there was something happening, something the children weren't admitting, she would catch it on film. She had to. It was the only way she'd ever find out the truth. Finally, she installs the hidden cameras all over the house. With a sigh of satisfaction, she exclaims, "There." She decides to keep her plan a secret, without mentioning it to her children, husband or nanny, her sister Raina. She needed to see what was happening with her own eyes. The day had been long at work, but something gnawed at her relentlessly, pushing her to leave her desk and drive home. No one knew she was coming. Lena opened the front door carefully, stepping inside with quiet, deliberate movements. The silence was thick, more oppressive than usual. She listened for any sound, anything at all, but the house remained still. Her instincts flared, warning her that something wasn't right. She moved further into the house, slipping her shoes off to silence her steps as she headed upstairs. That's when she heard it. A faint shuffle, the sound of something shifting behind a door. Her pulse quickened as she made her way toward the bedroom. As she reached the top of the stairs, the bedroom door creaked open slightly. And then she saw him, Damien, stepping out of the room, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair tousled. He froze the moment he spotted her, his eyes wide with surprise. "Lena?" he stammered, his voice unsteady. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes locked on him, taking in the disheveled state of his clothes. His pants were wrinkled, his belt loosely hanging from the loops, and his shirt was only halfway tucked in. It didn't take long for her to realize something was terribly wrong. The pieces fell into place in her mind with a sickening clarity. "What are you doing here, Damien?" she asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the heavy silence that now filled the space between them. She stepped closer, her gaze narrowing, unable to tear her eyes away from his rumpled clothes. He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair, the awkwardness in his posture, telling her more than his words ever could. I came home early too. Wanted to check on the kids. You know, just to see if they were up to anything. With Raina not here today, I thought they might be getting into trouble." Lena felt a flicker of confusion. "The children?" His explanation felt rehearsed, too convenient. But before she could press him further, Damien moved down the stairs toward her, taking her hand in his. "Come on," he said, his tone light but forced. "Let's check on them together. Maybe they're getting into some mischief." They stopped outside Liam's room first. Damien knocked lightly on the door, then turned the knob, pushing it open. The room was quiet, the curtains drawn, and Liam's was lying on his bed, engrossed in a video game. "Hey, bud," Damien said with a smile, walking into the room. "What are you up to?" Liam's barely looked up, giving a quick shrug. "Just playing," he muttered, his focus still on the screen. Lena stood by the door, watching the scene unfold. Her mind was spinning, trying to piece together why Damien was so intent on checking the children. Was he trying to distract her? Why did he look so frazzled? Her thoughts were interrupted when Damien turned to her, flashing that same forced smile. "Looks like Liam's is behaving," he said. "Let's check on Mila, too." Without waiting for her to respond, he ushered her out of the room and down the hall to Mila's. The door was slightly ajar, and Damien gently pushed it open. Mila was curled up on her bed, reading a book, completely unaware of the tension radiating from her parents. Lena looked at her daughter, her chest tightening. Everything seemed so normal, too normal. But something felt wrong, lurking just beneath the surface. "Hi, sweetie," Lena finally said, her voice softer than before. Mila looked up, smiling faintly. "Hey, Mum. Just reading." Damien leaned against the doorframe, chuckling lightly. "Well, it seems like everyone's on their best behavior today," he said, glancing back at Lena. "Maybe I was worried for nothing. Why don't we head back downstairs? No need to worry about the kids today," he said, taking her hand once more, guiding her away from the upstairs rooms. Once downstairs, Damien tried to lighten the mood, talking about his day at work, offering to make dinner. The silence around Lena was thick, oppressive. It clung to her like a heavy fog, filling every corner of her mind as she sat in front of the computer. The camera footage, hours upon hours of mundane moments, had been rolling in front of her for days, but she had yet to find anything. The only thing she could focus on now was the slight hum of the monitor, the mechanical tick of the clock on the wall, and the faint flickering of the images in front of her. She had meticulously combed through each clip, desperate for some sign, anything. But tonight, something was different. As she clicked through the files, her finger hovering over the mouse, her breath caught in her throat. The screen flickered, and suddenly blurry images began to form. For a moment she frowned, trying to make sense of the indistinct shapes. Then, with startling clarity, the figures in the video came into focus. Her stomach dropped, and a chill ran down her spine. Lena couldn't breathe. Her entire body trembled as she clutched the edge of the desk, tears streaming down her face. She sat there for what felt like hours, her mind numb, her heart shattered. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen, even though she had seen enough. She had all the evidence she needed, but the weight of it pinned her to the chair, suffocating her. Tomorrow, she would confront them. Tomorrow, she would make sure they knew what they had done. The night passed slowly, each minute dragging on like an eternity. Lena didn't sleep. She remained seated on the sofa in the living room, staring blankly at the darkened screen of the computer. The dawn crept in through the curtains, casting a pale light across the room, but it did nothing to lift the weight that pressed down on her chest. Her hands trembled as she clasped them tightly in her lap, her eyes hollow, her face pale. She hadn't moved since the night before. Her thoughts were trapped in an endless loop of anger, pain, and disbelief. It was only when Raina arrived later that morning that the silence broke. Lena didn't acknowledge her sister's presence at first, didn't even turn her head when Raina called out to her. "Lena, what's wrong?" Raina asked, her voice tinged with concern as she approached her sister. Lena's eyes remained fixed on the floor, her body stiff and unmoving. Raina reached out, her hand hovering over Lena's shoulder before finally resting there gently. "Lena, are you all right? You're scaring me." Without warning, Lena's body jolted, her eyes narrowing as a slow, bitter laugh escaped her lips. The sound was hollow, almost sinister, and Raina stepped back, startled. "Raina," Lena said, her voice cold, dripping with fury. "Don't touch me." Damien walked in just as Raina recoiled, confusion flickering across his face. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone laced with impatience. He glanced at Raina, then back at Lena, who was now standing, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. "Tell me what's wrong, Lena," Damien demanded. "This is ridiculous." Lena's eyes darkened, and she turned to face him fully, her voice a low growl. "You want to know what's wrong with me?" She took a step closer, her gaze burning with unrestrained fury. "I'll show you what's wrong." Without another word, she grabbed both Damien and Raina by the wrist, dragging them toward the computer in the corner of the room. Her movements were forceful, her grip unyielding. "What are you doing?" Damien muttered, irritation clear in his voice as he glanced at Raina, who now looked as pale as a ghost. Lena didn't respond. She slammed the mouse down, clicked through the files with precision, and pulled up the video. She didn't say a word as the screen flickered to life, the dark truth unfolding before their eyes. The video showed Damien, her husband, stepping into the guest bedroom. It was from a day they had both come home early. Then Raina entered the room behind him. Damien and Raina, her husband and her sister, moved closer together, their bodies intertwined in a way that made her stomach churn with revulsion. In the corner of the screen, another camera caught movement in the hallway. Lena leaned forward, squinting at the small figures, her heart clenched when she recognized them, Myla and Liam's, her children. They stood frozen at the door, peeking through the crack as they watched the scene unfolding inside the guest room. Lena's breath hitched, her mind reeling as she watched the children's innocent faces staring at something they couldn't possibly understand. They didn't know what they were witnessing. She could see it in their wide-eyed curiosity, their tiny hands gripping the doorframe. The room was eerily silent as the footage played, the weight of the betrayal filling the air like a thick fog. But then, in the corner, Damien's gaze flickered as the camera captured something he hadn't noticed before. Myla and Liam's, standing outside the door, watching. What happened next ripped through her heart. Myla and Liam's, unaware of the gravity of what they had seen, imitated the scene they had just witnessed. They took off their clothes, laying down together, Myla even mimicking the sounds she had heard Raina make. The color drained from his face as he realized what the children had seen, what they had unknowingly imitated in their bedroom afterward. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the computer as the video continued to play. Then, slowly, Lena turned to face them. There was nothing left to say. The truth was out. Damien and Raina stood frozen in front of the screen, their faces pale, their mouths agape. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant hum of traffic outside. But inside the house, it was as though time had stopped, trapping them in a moment that could never be undone. Lena's hand twitched at her side, her fingers curling into a tight fist. Her heart pounded in her chest, her blood boiling with rage, betrayal, and disgust. She had seen enough, more than enough, and she couldn't contain it any longer. With a sudden, fierce movement, Lena stepped forward and slapped Raina hard across the face. The sharp crack of her hand against her sister's skin echoed through the room, and Raina staggered back, tears instantly welling up in her eyes. "How could you?" Lena's voice trembled with fury, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I gave you everything. I gave you a job, a place to stay, money when you needed it. And this is how you repay me? By sleeping with my husband? By betraying me? Your own sister?" Raina clutched her cheek, her lip trembling as tears streamed down her face. "Lena, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she stammered, her voice breaking. "Please, you have to believe me." But Lena's rage flared even hotter. "Believe you?" she spat, taking a step closer, her voice growing louder with each word. "You want me to believe you? Believe what? After you've destroyed my family, my marriage, my children's lives?" Damien, who had been standing in stunned silence, suddenly moved forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Lena, calm down," he said, his voice low and pleading. "It was a mistake, all right? We didn't mean for this to happen. I know it's wrong, but let's not make this worse than it already is." "Make it worse?" Lena whirled on him, her eyes narrowing with unbridled fury. "You want to talk about making things worse, Damien? You, the man I gave my life to, the man I had children with, betrayed me with my own sister. You made it worse." Without warning, Lena slapped him across the face as well, harder than she had hit Raina. Damien stumbled back, one hand going to his cheek as shock flashed across his face. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice shaking. "How dare you try to act like this can be smoothed over with some pathetic excuse? I worked day and night for this family. I gave you children. I sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay me, by sleeping with Raina behind my back." Damien's face twisted, but he didn't respond. There was nothing he could say that would fix what he had done. Nothing that would erase the damage. Lena's anger only grew, a deep well of pain and betrayal rising to the surface. "Get out," she demanded, her voice cold and unyielding. "Both of you. Now." Raina sobbed, her voice shaky as she tried to step closer to Lena. "Please, Lena, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to understand." "Understand?" Lena's voice was venomous. "There's nothing to understand, Raina. You betrayed me, and there's no coming back from that." Raina collapsed to the floor, crying uncontrollably, her hands clasped in front of her as she begged for forgiveness. But Lena's heart had hardened. There was no forgiveness left to give. "Get out of my house," Lena said again, her voice low and dangerous. "Both of you." Damien, realizing there was no point in arguing, stepped toward Raina, his hand reaching out to help her up. But as soon as he touched her, Lena's voice sliced through the room again. "Don't you dare touch her," she snapped. "You don't get to play the hero now. Pack your things and get out." There was no further discussion, no more pleading. Lena stood firm, her eyes locked on them as they scrambled to gather their belongings. The door slammed behind them, and with that, the weight of their betrayal crashed over her in full. Later, as the night stretched on and the quiet of the house felt heavier than ever, Lena sat down with her children. Liam's and Mila had been quiet, confused by the tension they felt, but didn't fully understand. Lena looked at them both, her heart aching for the innocence they had lost because of the mess created by the adults around them. "I need to talk to you about what happened," Lena began, her voice soft but steady. The children looked at her, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. "What you saw? What happened between your father and your aunt? It was wrong. It was something that should never have happened. And I want you to know that you should never, ever imitate what you saw. Liam's nodded slowly, his small hand clutching Mila's. But, Mommy, Mila said, her voice barely above a whisper, are we in trouble? Lena's heart broke a little more. No, sweetie, she said gently. You're not in trouble. What happened wasn't your fault. But you need to understand that sometimes adults do things that are wrong. Just because someone is older doesn't mean they're right. She looked at them both, her expression solemn. Your father and Raina made a mistake. A big one. But that doesn't mean you should think it's okay to copy them. You're better than that. You're good kids. The room was quiet again, but this time it was a quiet filled with understanding. In the days that followed, Lena began the process of divorce. There was no going back from this. The marriage had crumbled beyond repair. Damien was out of her life, and Raina, despite her tearful apologies, would never be allowed back into her home. Even when their mother called, pleading with Lena to forgive Raina, to let her back into the family, Lena stood firm. I've already forgiven her, but forgiveness doesn't mean letting her back into my life, Lena said, her voice steady. I don't need people who destroy what I've built. Her mother fell silent, and as the days turned into weeks, Lena found herself alone but resolute. She had lost her marriage, her trust in her sister, and the life she had built for years. But what she gained was a sense of clarity, a hard-won understanding that sometimes the only way to heal was to let go of those who had broken you, even if they were family. The days passed slowly at first, the kind of quiet that follows a storm. Lena had grown used to the silence, but it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was one of peace. Her house, once filled with the tension of betrayal and broken trust, now breathed freely again. Her world had changed, but in that change she found something unexpected: freedom. Weeks had gone by since Damien had left. She hadn't heard a word from him, and she didn't care to. He had become a ghost, someone she no longer wished to haunt her life. But one afternoon, as she stood waiting outside the school to pick up Mila and Liam's, she saw him. Across the street, half hidden behind a tree, stood Damien. His familiar figure was unmistakable, though he looked different now, older, more tired. His eyes were fixed on their children as they ran toward Lena, their backpacks bouncing with each step. But as soon as he saw her looking back at him, his gaze dropped, and within seconds, he disappeared into the crowd. Lena's heart barely skipped a beat. She turned back to her kids, giving them both a warm hug, as if nothing had happened. Damien's presence didn't disturb her anymore. He was part of the past, and she had no reason to linger there. It wasn't long after that her mother called with news. Raina and Damien. They've broken up, her mother said, her voice tentative, as if she didn't know how Lena would react. But Lena didn't react at all. I don't care, Mom, she interrupted calmly. Please, don't mention them to me again. There was a pause on the other end of the line, but Lena could feel the finality in her own words. It wasn't anger, just a clean severing of what no longer mattered. For the first time in a long while, she felt light, untethered. Lena's focus now was on her children. Liam's and Mila had grown closer to her after everything that had happened. They were resilient, strong, but they had changed in subtle ways, ways that only a mother could notice. Mila had become more thoughtful, more attuned to the emotions around her. Liam's, once the more carefree of the two, had become protective of his sister, always looking out for her in quiet, older brother ways. Together, the three of them had rebuilt their world. Lena made sure their home was filled with laughter again. They found joy in the small moments, family dinners where they cooked together, weekend trips to the park, and late-night movie marathons. The weight of the past had lifted, replaced with something far more precious, a sense of togetherness, of safety. In the quiet moments, Lena reflected on how far they had come. She had built a life she was proud of, not just for herself, but for her children. And as she watched them grow stronger, she realized that her own strength had been there all along, waiting to rise from the ashes of her broken marriage. But Lena didn't stop there. With her newfound freedom, she began to rediscover herself. For years, she had been consumed by the roles of wife and mother, forgetting the parts of herself that made her her. Now, with the weight of Damien and Raina gone, she had space to breathe, to dream, to imagine what her future could hold. She joined a local book club, something she had always wanted to do but never found the time for. There, she met new people, formed new friendships that filled her life with warmth and laughter. She started painting again, an old passion she had abandoned in the chaos of marriage and motherhood. And with every stroke of the brush, she felt a little piece of herself returning. For the first time in years, Lena allowed herself to dream. She dreamed of traveling, of taking her kids on a summer road trip across the country. She dreamed of learning new things, maybe taking up photography or even learning to play the piano. The possibilities stretched out before her like a road, endless and full of promise. There were still hard days, of course. There were moments when the memories crept back, when the pain of betrayal felt fresh again. But those moments were fleeting, and each time they passed, Lena found herself standing a little taller, a little more sure of the life she was building. One evening, as the sun set and the house was bathed in a warm, golden light, Lena sat on the porch, watching Mila and Liam's play in the yard. Their laughter echoed through the air, a sound that made her heart swell with contentment. She smiled softly, sipping her tea as she watched them, knowing that this was what peace felt like. As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Lena looked out toward the horizon. For the first time in a long time, she felt no fear about what the future held. There was only hope and a quiet, unwavering strength. She had survived the storm, and now she was standing on the other side of it, stronger and more certain of herself than ever before. Life, she realized, wasn't just about surviving the hardships. Lena took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling her lungs, and smiled. The road ahead was bright, full of possibilities she hadn't dared to dream of before. And this time, she was walking it on her own terms. With her children by her side, she knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. And as they laughed and played, their joy filling the night, Lena knew one thing for certain. The future was hers. Wow, what a story, right? I can't even begin to express the shock and betrayal that we all felt watching this unfold. To see a mother walk in on her own children and then uncover the twisted truth behind it all. It's beyond heartbreaking. Damien and Raina, they're the real villains here. Their selfishness, their betrayal. It destroyed an entire family. How could they even do that, knowing how much Lena sacrificed for them? It's unforgivable, and it just leaves you feeling disgusted. But what about Lena's strength, huh? She stood tall, protected her kids, and reclaimed her life. That's something to admire. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Who do you think is more to blame, Damien or Raina? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if this story left you feeling as angry as it did me, hit that like button and let's keep the conversation going.